you can definitely negotiate with a builder. But what you don't want to be doing is, if you've got a tender or you've got multiple tenders, you don't want to be negotiating with multiple people at the same time. You're not really allowed to do that.
No.
So you kind of have to then still work out, right, this is the builder that I really want to work with. The price is not where we need it to be, but we're going to work with this builder to try and get it to the price that we're comfortable with.
Welcome, episode 7. Basically speaking, it feels like it's been a little while, but it probably hasn't. However, we have, I'm going to say, a seasoned guest. Chris, as everyone knows, works in the office. I think we did an intro, so episode 1, just a bit of a general intro to what we're going to
like the start of a project and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And since then we've had, I guess, specialist guests, not that you're not special, but specialist guests in the field of each of the topics, which has been really good, really informative. And Instagram and the socials don't lie. It's getting some good traction. There's actually some questions coming out of it, which is really good. Today's episode, though, we postulated over this for ages, because like every other episode, but this one's really, I'm going to say full on. I think it's always quite topical, and it's about contractor selection, and it's whether you're a developer, the mums and dads doing a renovation, house, doctors, fit out, whatever. This is critical. I mean, we've both built, we've done renovations. It's a really critical bit, and what we want to try and do here is a whole lot of things, right? It's all about information and the options in around how do you get that contractor on board after doing all of the bits that we've done so far, right? So we'll get into what the traditions are or were, or how we do it, what builders that have different options and so forth. And the postulation I said before came about, do we get one of our myriad of builders in? And we thought, well, we could, don't want to, stand on people's toes. And we also don't want to run the risk of just talking about one way to do it. So I thought, we deal with it every day, right? And you and I, more than anybody probably in the office when it gets to that pointed end, because it's heavy, it's legal, there's clauses, there's a lot of money involved, right? So I think it's probably appropriate that we talk about it. Yep. So, intro to Chris. I'm going to pour a wine. We're going to go for a white this time rather than a red. You're going to open up the vault.
All right.
Because it's your favourite bit. You're just like, every time, can I do it?
Let's get into it then.
So that was my little bit of a spin on it. Do you want to add a bit to it, and then we can jump into a couple of questions?
I think for me, the thing that's really important about this one is when our clients are signing a contract with a builder, they're signing a contract for a considerable sum of money. And so there's a lot of questions that people have around that. That they kind of need to understand, to be able to have that confidence with the builder. Much more so than I think a lot of the other consultants and that sort of stuff that we deal with. If you're signing a fee proposal or a quote with an engineer, for example, there's some money involved, but the vast sum of money that people are looking at with their renovations makes it a really difficult thing for our clients to kind of understand. What they're kind of getting into, I suppose. It's
kind of when, should I say, architecture gets serious. I mean, we take it obviously all pretty serious, but this is real, this is people's lifestyles, right? Yeah. And predominantly our clientele is the mums and dads. It could be their first house. So there's a lot on the line. It's quite emotive. It's, there's disappointment along the way, and it's about kind of how do we manage those expectations. Perfect world though, and to just a real recap is from sketch design through to this stage, it's a dark art, right? Like for the moment we just put that pen to paper, we don't know how much that design's costing, but we're using precedent, we're using history, we're using statistics, we're using more often not a little bit of feedback from some early engagement with a builder. And sometimes that can be on a very cursory coffee chat. Hey, we've got this project up. Do you want to have that's really valuable. So by the time we've gotten to this point where we're officially trying to get, you can call it quotes, estimates, preliminaries, we've done a lot of that legwork, but it's still a dark art. You know, we're not magicians. We're often, say, held accountable to it, but people do trust us to look up to, you know, we're going to get, the aim is to get to the costs to a budget, right? Now, there's ups and downs and ins and outs to that. So there's a myriad of ways we can, well, we try and we look to manage that, but we do need that support from the client to kind of hang in there, because we're prepared to go through iterations.
Yeah, and I think the other part as well, like there's, as you say, there's different ways of going about it, and there's pros and cons to each, and it's a matter of which is going to be right for that particular client in terms of where they're needing that certainty around things, whether or not it's having the certainty around what that expected construction cost is going to be, or it's the certainty around having 3 or 4 different prices to be able to compare and know that you're getting the best price.
Yeah.
So each one kind of comes with its own own benefits with how you deal with builders and how you engage them.
Yeah, and I mean, for us, obviously, we want to get value for money, but you still want to know that it's competitive. And in that, we can often say it because at any given time we might have 2, 3, 10 projects at varying stages of the procurement of contractors, right? So we have got ears to the ground on things, but we're not. It's not definitive. So we have, whether it's gut feels or whether it's tables, and we've gone through various ways of trying to best estimate and guide costing along the way, and I think we do it pretty well. There's so many things at play though, right? Like, and you know, from cost of materials to politics to COVID to, you know, and it does throw spanners in the works, and it's that constant discussion with our builders, just keeping in check with, hey, what are we feeling? You know, what are we hearing? What can we sense? What's the market say? What are the manufacturers saying? Are they saying rises are coming? And all those sorts of things. So we've got to constantly be flipping hats, right? Which I find challenging, I find intriguing, and I think we're problem solving. And I guess the thing is, we still want to get the best value for money in getting a builder for a project. That's conceptually, that's what we all want. The client wants it, we want it, the builder wants it. There's money to be made by all parties, and there's the protection of someone's investment that we've also got to make sure that we're keeping in check with. And I mean, we don't go fishing for, you know, the multi-million dollar projects. That's not we'll service anybody as long as their brief is matching with what we think they can do. Then we try to look to align builders. So that's a pretty long-winded intro, which has pretty much been the case the whole time.
That's your standard, I think, isn't it?
I'm going to go. You know, this is a good one in that I usually make some notes and I prepare it with respect to the guest. You've gone and done this, but you are still the guest, so I'm going to read your questions to you, but we'll see how they go. So, when to involve a builder?
So there's 2 ways that we see it most often. The traditional way is we would go and get all of our documentation complete, and then when we've got all of that documentation complete, we can then go out to builders for tendering. So at that stage, we'd then be going out to 2, 3, 4 builders to get a tender price, and that was probably how it happened. That was probably the most common way it happened until about probably maybe 5 years ago or so. What we're seeing a little bit more now is builders wanting to be on board a project from the very early stage. So after we've kind of done that initial concept design, they'd be wanting to be having a look at a project and providing feedback on it, so that they can, I guess for them, it kind of gets them aligned with the project in terms of they get to know the client, they get to know the design, they understand when it's likely to be built, and they kind of have a reasonable idea of the expected build cost. But they can also provide feedback so that the client can then make informed decisions along the way as to whether or not they can afford to, extend the house as much as what they would like to, and those sorts of things. So it kind of takes a little bit of that guesswork out of, a little bit of the guesswork out of,
And the hope, right?
Forecasting what that price is going to be. So we're starting to see that a lot more, and there's a few builders that actually are doing a really good, thorough, initial early costing. And they go by, I guess, past projects. So there's still guesswork in it in that early stage. So they're making some estimates. But as the drawings become more refined, they can start to say, right, well, this is getting a bit beyond what would have been anticipated. So that's kind of potentially pushing the cost up. Or we're sticking within what our budget was for these items. So those are probably the two main things that we're seeing at the moment. And I guess the other thing that builders are probably realising more than they have in the past is just how much time goes into pricing and how much it's costing them to put a price together. So again, several years ago, it was quite easy to get 4 builders pricing a project, and they'd all do so knowing that there's a 25% chance that they're going to win it. But they're probably starting to see how much. I mean, the drawings are a lot more detailed than I think they ever used to be as well. Not just from us. I think just industry wide, they're getting more detailed because people don't want that risk when they're pricing a project or when they're designing a project. So there needs to be a lot more information in there. Takes longer to price it all, and so they're just, I guess, investing a lot more time, which then ends up costing them money, and a lot of the time they're actually passing some of that on to the client. So they're asking for clients to be paying some degree of fee for the pricing as well. So so it's kind of a lot to weigh up for a client. Do they want that builder aligned with the project from a fairly early stage? You might then feel a bit like you're locked into that builder right from the word go, or do you end up trying to go down the path of getting multiple builders to price and gives you that potentially a bit more certainty that you're getting the best value for money, but it may not necessarily be the case anyway.
And I don't think there's a right or a wrong. I think what we have now, which I find gives some level of control back to all the parties to make a decision, is that, there's so many things that can sway that. It could be timing, it could be a case of a client going, oh, we need to start then because of there's knock-on effects, whether they're selling a previous house and so on and so on. So sometimes they can, I guess, be a little bit hamstrung to go, oh, well, if there is a builder available, let's just talk to them. And there's risks in that as well. There's risks in everything. But I think the purpose of this is that every single project, I guess, is treated differently to every other, and you've got to go through the machinations of availabilities, and not in this order, but availability of the builder, the willingness of the builder, is the construction and design of what we've done, is it appropriate to all builders, or does it narrow down to a field? And I think what we've been doing for many years now is looking at putting into a really detailed spreadsheet and analyses of our builders, right? And not who's better or worse or whatever, nothing to do with that. It's about trying to align builders with projects and clients, because it's not just about the price. That's how I feel about it. And I find if we sit down with builders, like we did one this morning, which was fantastic, and heard what they do and how they, procure their things and how they run their business. Importantly, what's their sweet spot? And it might be a dollar value, it might be a locality, it might be a mixture of things. Once we know that, we can put that over there and go, okay, that's great. If we get a project that fits those, we can then still run a competitive tender with 3 or 4 of like-minded. So we haven't just pulled them out of a phone book. We're really trying to pair project with client, with builder, with architect, with service and everything. So there's just a hell of a lot in it, I think. Which is all this process.
Yeah, and another part of that, reviewing all the builders that we potentially want to work with, a part of that is actually going and checking out their QBCC license and boring things like that, just to make sure that if we're putting this name of a builder in front of a client, we can actually say, look, they've had no issues over the last few years, or there might be something that comes up in their QBCC license details, and then you can kind of give that information to the client so that they understand the risk.
Yeah.
Even if it's a builder that they might really want to use, it's a decision that they've got to make as to whether or not that's something they're confident enough to move ahead with.
Yeah. I find something interesting at the moment that, look, it's busy out there, right? It's difficult to get commitments in some respects from builders because they might be booked up to 28, right? And that's not uncommon. I think what we're seeing now, even with older school builders, that they're evolving really well and adapting. And even though they're super busy, I just find that their planning ahead is so much better than even going back 10 years ago. That they know that, okay, well, this project you're talking to me about might not be ready to start for 12 months, which of 10 years ago would be like, oh, call me in 9.5 months and we'll talk about it. Now they are setting themselves up, and that's got to do with a lot of things, the way QBCC structure their contracts and sort of the protection of subbies and all those sorts of things. I'm loving it because right in these busy times, you could quite easily see it being the opposite way and going, no, I don't have time. But they're actually taking their time to be engaged and be involved early on. And it's like we're nearly having to throw the bait out there with some of our designs and go, is this something that could interest you down further? Which I really like. I think that's a method in inevitably getting the right builder for the job, because there's a whole heap of due diligence even in that process.
Yeah.
That was question one. So part one was at the start, as you said, with one builder, just a ballpark price, and then, or after documentation is complete with multiple builders. And again, there's many ways to do that. We touch a little bit, you touched on it a bit before about builders passing on a cost to do so. And look, I've found it does come as a bit of surprise to some clients because it's not normally done. However, I look at it from the perspective of, I think it's a value add, especially if you're talking about, well, whatever, you're talking about spending 600,000 or 6 million. If you've got to spend, anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 on a detailed estimate done in their house with a bill of quantities that you get at the end. That's the other thing, is you then get a builder that's vested in that. That $4,000 is not covering probably anywhere near the cost. They put a lot, like it could take 120 hours for a builder to properly, so it's what it is. It shows an intent from the client as an engagement, which I do like, and I don't mind, not necessarily pushing it, but I do support the notion, because I just feel that nobody works for free, and I think it's up to the client whether they choose to do 1, 2, 3, or 4, and to see whether they feel there's value in them doing that.
Yeah, and I think probably the thing about that clients might not realise is how detailed a tender they'd be getting back.
Yeah,
as a result.
Yeah.
We've seen tenders where you get 2 pages back, and it's and there's not really a lot of information in there to know that it's been well priced. But then with the majority of builders that are charging for these tenders, you end up with 20, 30 pages, and you can kind of really review everything. Like it's almost broken down into each you've got your kitchen, and then you've got your bathroom and all these things, so you can actually really start to look at it and go, right, well, if we're looking to save money, there's 10 grand there that I can do it, and and then 5 grand there, and those sorts of things. So you can really start to actually use that information that you get out of them as well.
Well, there could be a couple of 100 dot points and line items, whereas, and I sort of put yourself in the shoes of a builder, and you say, okay, well, if I'm going to spend 3 weeks putting together a tender, a proposal of sorts, and I'm not getting it paid for it, you're sort of like, well, do I just give that information away, or do I give the summary, which might be 10 line items, and it's a little like, they're bigger numbers, but if you do pay for their service and they come and present it to you and sit down and explain it, and it's effectively open book, yes, down there somewhere it'll probably talk about their margin. It's okay for them to make money. I think that's why they do it, right?
So you don't want them running out of money halfway through your project.
That's another flip side, right, of the being left holding the baby, because the builder isn't getting paid or the likes. But look, probably don't need to harp on it, but I guess for people listening, I don't think it's too much to ask to be paying for a small cost for a really detailed tender that you get and you can pour over and we can all go through it together.
Yep.
And that openness about that, I think, is a good start to a relationship for for the builder and the client.
And I think ultimately that's the bit that probably ends up pushing a lot of clients away from tendering with 4 builders or something these days.
Yeah, it can do.
Because that gets expensive. So,
it's true.
Is it a matter of going through doing more of your due diligence to work out which builder you actually would consider working with before you even ask them to get that?
I think it's the sum of all those things, and I think there's no silver bullet here, and it's all of these things. And this is just about awareness, right? This is about saying methods to do so, but there's still old school. Ring the builder, talk to them, and see how they feel. And you're going to spend
talk to their old clients or see some of their work and those sorts of things.
You're going to spend 18 months, 2 years with them. You've got to like them. You've got to get along with them, and that is a whole lot of due diligence in another reign. So I think long gone are those days of right, everything's done right. Oh, let's just get a builder. It just doesn't happen that way. We value that end of that's super important. At the end of the day, if we don't have a builder that has a synergy with the project and the client, what have we got? We've got some pretty drawings and a good set of documents that are paid for, but they can't get built or. So I think that is really important. Look, we may be covering some of these things, but how do I choose a builder, or do I have a choice?
I think the thing I kind of wanted to, I mean, we've got a whole lot of builders that we can recommend. We're not attached to any of them.
No.
So any builder that you, I mean, it's going to be you signing a contract with a builder. So you've absolutely got the choice with whoever you want to work with. We'll be putting forward people that we think are suitable for you and your project.
Yep.
But you're not attached to them in any real capacity. So, yeah, I think it's important for people to understand that, we might put a list of 4, 5, 6 names down, and you might look at some of them and go, I've actually heard bad things about that builder, or I've seen some of their work around the corner, and it's it's not what I want to do. And then you might talk to some of them and just think, oh, this is like getting blood out of a stone, to be able to kind of get the information that you want. And as you say, you're going to be working with them for 12 months, 18 months, or whatever it is. So is that actually the right person for you? So yeah, it is a matter of kind of understanding those things and making sure that you're making the right decision for your project.
And I think, as you just said, and just for clarity, it's the builder and the client signing the contract, right? Which is, okay, might be stating the obvious. We're there to facilitate it at this stage. Often these contract signings or negotiations are happening in our office. We facilitate it. We have a section about our scope, which is contractor selection. Pretty obvious. We can then be nominated into that if we want. We'll get to that in a bit. But the critical thing here is that we're facilitating the discussion, and based on everything we've spoken about so far, but it doesn't preclude the client doing their own due diligence, and they should. They can either ask us questions, see if the builder we're the conduit at this stage of the game until they have a signed contract, and then the discussions, pending our involvement, it's contractual. Like that, there's discussions there. Point 2. Can I bring my own builder to the table?
There's a number of builders that we work with that have come to us via our clients saying this is someone who I want to work with. So absolutely. We always keen to talk to people that want to build the work that we design. And the only thing that I reckon we need to make sure people are aware of is like the builders that we recommend. We've done a lot of that checking of QBCC details and that sort of stuff. So if you're going to bring a builder to the table, let us go through that same process and make sure that they're actually the right. Make sure they're the right fit for you. And again, like it might be that if you're going out to tender, if you're going out with a builder that you want, it'd be good to go out with a builder that we recommend as well, just so we know that when the price comes back, it's actually kind of where we thought it should.
More often than not, it's a good thing because it's, again, more often than not come from, my sister built with this person, or my accountant's friend is there and we've met them before and they're really nice. And so it generally comes with bit of a, "Phew, that's good, yeah, no problem." And it further reinforces that we aren't wedded to anyone in particular. So I think, that can be good, but as you said, we've still got to then, we would go, yeah, absolutely, but hey, we'll just do some checks.
Yeah.
Just so we've got more of a peace of mind. It's not anything other than that.
Yep.
Background checking, QBCC, past clients and work. And I think all of those three can happen. Some of them are more, jump online and you can see. The past clients one, whether it's a past client of ours and the builder, it's a case of just ringing them and saying, hey, would you mind if someone called you? And we would respect any answers out of there. The irony of that is that person they'd be ringing probably would have had that discussion with us 2 years ago about ringing someone else. So most are quite obliged, especially if the experience has been wonderful and people are proud and they want to bring people through. So I think all of that is great. I guess at that point when the client is signing with a builder, it's really that full stop on it. We've done everything. We're really looking forward to this. And that's when it's the most successful. Again, on this same question, how do I choose a builder? Availability.
Yeah. So, and I mean, a lot of the time we've got clients who are like, I need to start by March so that I can be finished by, in time for someone's birthday or something like that. And that's a valid constraint that clients have.
Yep.
Sometimes that'll mean that you just don't get the builder that you want because they don't have an availability to start for another 6 months or a year or something like that. And that's perfectly fine. There's going to be a little bit of compromise when if you're looking at price and availability and who you want to work with and that sort of stuff. Builders can only take on so many projects at a time. So it's really important to make sure that you're getting a builder that is going to be able to start when it suits you, I suppose.
And I think some of and I'm generalising here, but some of the builders we use, they're of a scale that they might have themselves, which might be 40% on the tools and 60%, managing. They might have an apprentice, they might have a foreman. So they might only have 3 or 4, right, that are wedded to there. They might only do 2 projects a year. Yeah. So just to put that in context, for you as a client to be lucky enough to grab a builder that are only doing 2 homes a year, that's just more contextual to go, oh, really, do they only do that? I'd thought they would do, a lot of people say to us, I thought they'd do like 20 houses a year. And you're like, no. So that's why it's really, that's really critical to talk about early. I've got a client at the moment and he's awesome and he's in a planning type role, not in construction, but a planning type role. One of the first questions before we'd even put pen to paper, he goes, can we engage with the builder now? Now, it's kind of music to my ears, but at the same time, I had nothing to show a builder, right? So, but that just showed me that, hey, we appreciate that there's a lot of links in this chain. The last thing we want to be doing is, and it happens, we'd start to say, oh, should we talk to a builder? Oh, no, wait. Problem is waiting. You then go, right, oh, we're done, cool, we're ready for a builder. And that point 4 availability, you ring Joe Bloggs and go, hey, they really like you, they've done the due diligence, when do you think you could start? And they're like, oh, probably in about 18 months. So you can, not that there's a guarantee to get them there, but you get some interest out of them. So I think just again, planning and future-proofing some decisions can play into that as well. Sometimes the hand's forced, right? Like they've got twins on the way and there's a limited time, right? You only know when you know.
Yeah.
Suitability for the project.
We've got builders that we work with that might have really talented carpenters and that sort of stuff, and they're perfect for the workers' cottages and that sort of thing. That's the sort of skill set that you're going to need on those sorts of sites. And then we've got builders who just want to pour everything in concrete, and they might not be the not be the one that's suited to your project. So again, you might look at a lot of builders and think, oh, I really like the sort of stuff they do, but that might not be your project. That might not be the right people for you.
And that can actually be, part of that can be nearly determined quite early because you are working on a workers' cottage. So you're like, okay, we're in this realm of builders. We can even start thinking who would suit that project. Yeah. But one example, the project we got up the coast, which is, a high quality home, but it's literally all concrete construction. So the builder who's building that, when I spoke to him, he's like literally not long after that signed that contract, large contract, he's like, oh, talking to me about other projects. I'm like, oh, wouldn't you have your hands full here? And he says, well, I've got a crew of 5 chippy carpenters. The first 7 or 8 months of that project is all concrete. So, and I'm like, yeah, like, I, obviously know that, but it's only when you hear that from them, you're like, oh yeah, it's like, you do still need to put your guys onto another. So here I was thinking, oh, well, he's probably tied up for 2 years, but he's got openings for probably a couple of the smaller.
Yeah.
And it's a rare builder that will do that full concrete construction and also be able to do a smaller workers' cottage renovation, because they usually are geared one way or the other.
Yeah.
Now, that
they know where their strengths
all
are.
kudos to the builders that are happy to spread. But again, our spreadsheet sort of captures that. When we say, what's your preference? Oh, I love doing concrete construction. Great. Well, we'd rather you love a job, so you'll put your best effort into it, rather than, oh, we could do those, but it's not our thing. So I think, again, that's suitability.
And that sort of changes over time as well, because there's been builders that we've had that have been really good for those, a fairly small project.
Yep.
And when I say fairly small, like for a lot of our clients, it probably doesn't feel like a small project.
But that's
but for
exactly
builders,
right.
it might feel that way. And they might start off on some of those smaller projects, but then, their goal is to always be growing.
Yeah.
So like over the couple of years, they're then now not doing the small renovations. They want a bigger new house or something like that.
I think
kind of keeping up to date with what those builders are doing is actually really important as well, so that we know that we might look at 2 projects and go, oh, this is almost a replica of something we did 10 years ago.
Yep.
The builder that did that 10 years ago might not be doing that anymore.
Hopefully not because of that project. But it's funny, you mentioned the complexities, and I think sometimes, we might be talking, I don't want to throw money around on it, but a smaller renovation of a 1946 workers' cottage, they can sometimes be a little bit like making watches. Like, they're very heavily crafted. The complexity and design and time and coordination that we put in, the builders have to do that as well. There's like all these layers of the way that they're built versus concrete construction, maybe just a lot simpler and easier. But the magnitude of dollars doesn't relate to that. So it's not always dollar driven. It's the ability to craft as well. Experience, I think, sort of covered off on a little bit of that, but I think that's in a little bit in the QBCC stuff. And, sometimes we look at a builder going, oh, wow, that's we've seen a project or something, and they might be doing it for a job that's of another architect that we know. I've got no dramas picking up the phone and saying, hey, what do you think of that builder? And that's us doing the due diligence on that as well, which is important.
Yep.
Contract types.
So, I thought this would be important to bring up, just because, there are, and I'm guessing that we'll probably cover a lot more on contract types when we're dealing with contract administration and that sort of stuff in a future podcast. But so different builders might have preferences for some contract types rather than others, and some contract types, in our opinion, offer better protection for our clients and that sort of thing. So if you're, and we can give people advice as to around these different contracts, but if you're really keen to use a particular type of contract, you want to make sure that you're finding a builder that is prepared to use that contract. Because some of them have more paperwork or more risk for a builder or something like that. And if they're not prepared to do that, then there's almost no point sort of going down and getting them to do all that.
And you can have that awkward conversation like, oh, this is good, it's all working well.
Ready to sign, and not prepared to sign that.
Yeah, not doing that one.
So, it doesn't happen too often, but there have been a couple of occasions where where builders have been probably, I don't think it's ever gone to the point where they've been looked over after they've done the pricing, but in that short list, they were potentially looked over because they were just not prepared to take on the contract that the client was really wanting to use.
I think contracts can be, they are deep and legal and so on, and there are some more simple form ones, and there are some default settings, I guess, within, right? I think that one thing's important to note, and it's a little bit like buying a house. Like there's a contract, right? But the contract's only sealed clearly when both parties are signing it and they're agreeing through different clauses. But I think it's important to note that irrespective of the contract, there's still scope there for a variety of special conditions that can cover things. And I'll just give one example, which was in COVID, the dreaded COVID, and the pricing, the escalation of costs. Now, most contracts don't cover a rise and fall and cost escalation, right? So if a builder's going in with a fixed lump sum, which is what most clients want because they want a surety, which I get. But if you then say, well, no, you builder, you need to cover everything and we're not paying for any rises and falls, you run the two risks of the builder then, rightly so, probably building a little bit to cover some of those things, and or if the builder locks in at today's date and it goes up, then he's the one who has to wear that cost in theory, right? Which then, if it's not talked about and it just happens, the builder could go broke and you get left holding a baby, right? We've had the situation where it's just an open discussion about it in that really thick time of steel going up every 20 days. And there was an agreement in a special condition that basically said, if the merchant can prove to the builder that it is going up on a certain date, then it's agreed that, okay, well, that escalation can be covered, but maybe there's no administration cost or margin put on that. And it worked successfully, but that, again, we facilitated between the two parties and posed that question, and it got drawn into the contract. I think it's smart. I think it's protection. It's being fair. No one's taking anyone for a ride, and it's there in a legal form, and I think it worked really well. But the reason I say it, because I think a lot of people don't know that you do have a say in those things, and I think it's important. Yeah. Cost to get them to price. I think we've covered that a little bit. Again, I think it's well worth it.
And I think, again, we're seeing a lot of, going back 5 years, I reckon I can think of one of the builders that we would regularly work with that actually asked to be paid for the tendering. And I reckon I can think of maybe 2 or 3 builders at the moment who are happy to not charge.
Yes.
So it's very much kind of flipped around in that, what used to be unusual is now common.
And I think under this topic, how do I choose a builder? They're all just points to consider. There's no right or wrong. And if you have a strong feeling about you don't want to, that's fine. But
it just starts to limit who you can choose to get to price.
Detail in tenders.
So I think we kind of touched on this previously, and I think there's a lot of detail that goes into our documentation, and builders are more and more reluctant, rightfully so, I think, to start pricing on anything that's not fully resolved. They don't want to be putting allowances in because
there's risk.
It's risk that could go in any way. It's not that it's unfair to them or anything like that. It's just, if there's risk, they're going to be factoring it in, and everyone will be paying, really. So I think there's just a lot more detail in the tender set of drawings that builders require these days. There's a lot that we've got to do to get to that point, and then it's not a simple turnaround for builders to just say, right, I'll have all these prices back to you in a month, because there's might be 70 pages of joinery that goes out to one or two subcontractors that they might get to price as well. So there's a lot that they've got to do to get that information, I think.
And it's fair to say, and I'll draw an example in a minute, but it's time and cost. So the more detail we put into the documentation, the more accurate the cost is. The cost of construction. But the more time means it costs the client more for us to do that within our contract, but we've got to spend more to get there. So I'll draw this, you could have this square at 1 to 1, they'll call it 1 to 100, and there's a door. Now you could give that to a builder and go, can you price it? You can, right? But you can only price it, it's like, okay, well, it's, 4 by 4 with a door, and they can write it down and go, well, it's going to be X dollars. And it hasn't cost much to get there. So that's one way of doing it, but you're like, well, it's pretty rubbery, we don't really know. So the more, we start putting linings on it, we start putting a tag on it, we start putting dimensions on it. So the more detail you do, and then of course, there's an engineer that comes in, and the structure, not to throw engineers under the bus, it's not what this is about, but that's really important. If we can get our design and our efficiencies right, and our prelims of engineering, then it's measurable. Then a builder can go, okay, so we've got some preliminary engineering. There's sizes. I can measure my steel quantity, my concrete quantity. So that's, again, there's some cost to the engineer, all outlined. So the more we do, the better, but there's a balance. If we just go all the way through right to there and pick every nut and screw and go, geez, I hope this works.
Yeah.
That's dangerous. So the detail in the tender needs to be discussed, because it's also different for commercial. We're doing that commercial project. Won't name them because I don't like doing it, but our agreement was to get to, I think it was 60% of our documentation to go out to tender. Now, obviously, there's still 40% to go, and that could go up or down. It most likely goes up. But the tender comes back with 5 builders, hasn't come back yet, and it'll be X dollars. And then you can then get novated. You can then go under the banner of the builder to then finish off those documents. So that number, whether it's 50%, 60%, 70%, that's just a decision to be made. Again, all these are about communications. There's no tick a box. It's like, hey, these are the pros and cons. So once you've answered all the 10 questions, or the 10 points about that one question, then you're like, cool, that's how we're going to procure the building. That's how we're going to talk to the client. That's the level of documentation. This is how long it's going to take. And that's planning. And I think if the builder's on board with that, the architect's on board with it, and the client's on board with it, it's like, what could go wrong? You're limiting, you're de-risking things by having the discussion.
Yeah.
Can I work with them? Do I trust them? Are they easy to communicate with?
So what I like to do before builders have even started pricing, I like to get the client to meet with the builder.
Yeah.
I did it recently out on a renovation that we were about to send out for tendering. And I got the client to meet with all of the builders that were likely to tender, mostly because I wanted both the builder and the client to be able to say, this is someone that I'm going to be comfortable working with. It's not a waste of anyone's time to actually go through with this. So they kind of, at least were able to start developing that relationship. And before the prices even came back, the client already had an idea as to who they were hoping would be the preferred tenderer. In the end, I think there was kind of, he had a preference, and then someone else that was close behind, and the person that was probably his second preference ended up with the better price. So then it became a matter of, right, how much value do I put on that relationship with that builder?
And it's fair. I think it gives both parties, without going down the slippery slope and spending all the time and money, because that's the soft skill, that's the personal side. And I think if you meet the builder, it's you can either discount them straight away and vice versa, because it's okay. It's okay to say, oh look, maybe it's not a good fit. I'd rather know that then than.
And I think the builder would rather know as well.
Oh,
knowing
absolutely.
that they haven't invested.
No, I think it's super valuable.
However many hours into putting a price together when they were hoping to not.
Remember that job? And it's just a side note, but the project where we did that process and we had whittled it down to 2, and the client said, okay, well, we like them both. And they said, well, oh, that's right. And they had done their pricing. They'd met them once and they'd done their pricing, and they'd come back and they were within dollars of each other. And the client said to you, well, you pick the builder. And we're like, no, I think you should pick the builder. We're really drawn. So they took them out for lunch, and they came back and we really liked them even more. And it was one of those, it was like breaking up on a date with the one. It's like, it's so not you. The client feels
just luck, unfortunately.
And it was
flip of a coin.
I think it was like a $1.4 million home, and it came down to like $50 or something. So if you're in that situation all the time, it's good, because you've got this, you've made a very good judgment and a decision on who to go with. So that was under how do I choose a builder. Next one you've got is, what happens if I can't get the builder I want?
So I guess there's as we kind of mentioned before, there's a lot of things that can determine whether or not a builder's interested in the project. It might be the complexity of it, might be the price, might be the location, might be their timing and that sort of stuff. And it's a compromise, if you're not going to find the builder that you desperately want to work with, then you kind of have to go back and start doing that due diligence side of things again. And that's not to say that you'll end up with a worse builder, or if you've got your preference, and then whoever comes next. you're still kind of doing that due diligence into making sure that you're making a good decision around
absolutely.
who you're going to be working with.
I think if they've, most times that's happened before we've even started going, oh, we really like such and such's work. That's when you say, we need to probably start that chat now, just to sort of set them up for that, if that's possible.
Yeah. And I think the other part of that as well is you're doing all this due diligence to make sure that you want to work with that builder. The builder's probably doing a little bit of their own due diligence, making sure that they want to work with you as well.
Yeah.
Not saying you've got to be on your best behaviour or anything like that. It comes back to making sure that it's the right relationship for both parties. Because look, it's a long process getting something built. It's, building contracts are complex. You want to make, both parties want to make sure that it's something that they're actually entering into, wanting to go through with the whole thing.
We've got a couple of older school builders that are, and have openly said they're, approaching retirement. And when you say that, you go, okay, yeah, that's right. You got a few more houses, and you start looking at it going, you've probably got 2 left. And they're then going, the last 2 I want to build. It's got to be like a perfect situation.
Yeah.
And again, if they're upfront and honest about that and they like it, then they're more inclined to make it work. But when you look at it that way, a smaller scale builder, what in their lifetime, they're probably building 15 homes, 20 homes, maybe. When you put it into context like that and you go, oh, that's the builder I want, and I'm going to be one of their 15, you start going, oh, it is hard to get a builder. Yeah. So you said builders sometimes have the ability to pick and choose, yes?
Yeah.
Location, difficulty of projects, start date, and even client can influence builders' want for the project. I think, again, that's that what you just said, that meet and greet. And we haven't always done it that way, but I think it's proper valuable in that first instance. And I think builders and clients really appreciate that early engagement on that.
Yep.
Before everyone gets their heart set on things and time and money gets spent. When meeting with the builder, you'll be trying to decide if it's someone you want to work with, and they'll be doing the same. So, look, that was probably a quicker little section, that one there. But, yeah, it does happen. People come with an ideology of, oh, that's the builder I'd like, which is kind of good. I mean, it can happen the other way too. They can go to the builder first, and that's a whole different thing. And we think we've covered that prior. Tendering. Can I get 4 builders to tender?
At the moment, I'll probably be saying no. I guess I should mention that we had a project, a renovation that went out to tender late last year, and we got 4 tenders back in just before Christmas.
Yep.
And I think that was probably the first time in about, first time in several years that I think that I can recall that we've actually had 4 builders come back with a price.
Yeah.
Sometimes we've gone out to 4 builders knowing that there was 1 or 2 that were on the edge. Like if they signed another contract, then they'd miss out. So we might have gone out to 4 builders and only ended up with 2 prices back.
And that's happened a couple of times lately. And it's good for the builder, right? They've got some options. But, when a builder says to me, oh, I'm booked up till the 28 or till 28, often they're not contracted there yet, but there's inklings, right? But we've experienced it, we've seen it. Projects can fall over. Things can happen. So they've got to be careful that they don't cut themselves off if it's not 100% locked in. We've talked about what potentially the tendering process could cost with some. And look, there's a fee for us to run that, because all of this discussion is just time and hours spent. So we do have a small section in our fee proposal which is called CS, Contractor Selection. And we facilitate, because it could be, look, Helen's a piece of string, but it could be 4 weeks to 4 months. And you're not working on it full time, but there's a lot of hours to be spent in it. It's certainly something we don't make money out of, but we cover some costs to facilitate that process, which I think is fair. And some clients do ask us, what do you charge for that? And you go back into our Workflow Max and you go, well, on that job there, Chris and I spent 320 hours on something. And they're like, there's some crossover, of course, but
and I guess as well, for people to understand, it's not just a matter of emailing the drawings out to the builder and that's kind of it. There'll be questions that come back. So there might be a discrepancy in the drawings, or there might be something that's not clear, or and if any builder's got questions, then they come back and you've got to answer them. But then you've also got to make sure that all the builders are tendering based on that same information.
Well, to make it conforming, right?
That's right.
And like primarily they are, but they've still got their own systems, which we have to handpick through a little bit, which is fine.
And then at the end of the day, when you do get the prices back, you've got to compare apples with apples, and they've all prepared their tender slightly differently. Yeah. So when you're trying to compare it and kind of go, right, this is where all the costs are. You might be looking at one builder's tender and you're like, wow, the structural components here are outrageous. Yeah. And then you look at another tender and it doesn't look that way. So you've got to the amount of phone calls that you make to kind of understand how people have come up with.
Yeah. So again, it's not an exact science.
Yeah.
There's a final number at the end.
Yeah.
I've had one situation where I wouldn't say we shot ourselves in the foot, but we put it in an Excel spreadsheet. Each builder has line items. We try to get the 37 trades and try to align them. And I've had one guy who was, I don't know I think he was in accounting or very, very number orientated. And he was like, okay, cool. We'll have the concrete from there and the steel from there and the joinery from there. And you're just like, oh no, it doesn't quite work like that. That's the builder there, not. This isn't, it's not choose your own adventure. Yeah. But it does pose the questions to go, well, how come, there'll be little differences, but when you see big spikes, you're going, why is the glass, which might be 10% of the project, why is on this job it's only 2%? So something, it's sort of a bit of a red flag to go, oh, something's missed something. So that we get them in, and for us to then go through to ratify some of those things, then we've got to deliver it to the client and go, well, here's the pros and cons, and these are conditions, inclusions, exclusions. Again, you're just informing and trying to make a decision with the client as to what could be a good pathway.
The other thing it's allowed us to do in the past as well is, when you're ringing a builder to tell them they've missed out on a project, they kind of want to know why. Yeah. And it's been helpful when we're doing that to be able to say, having a good look at all of the tenders that we got 3 tenders back. You were pretty much on the money for 90% of the things, but then here's 2 items where your trades just had higher prices than other people, and that's where you ended up having a worse price.
And that might allow them to in future, like, I guess, double check that.
Yeah.
Or they might just stand by and go, well, that is what it costs, and you go, look, there's no.
It's fine.
It's just feedback.
Yeah, that's right. It helps them understand how they can be giving the best price.
But we want it as well. Yeah. Like we don't win anywhere near every one of our jobs, but when come back and go, hey, thank you so much. Just as a comparison, this is where we felt you go, oh, that's awesome. Like, it's sad you missed the job, but you go, okay, well, how do we make that better next time? One thing we talked about the cost to do some costings. What often isn't asked, and because you say to a client, oh, it's going to cost $4,000, and they go, yeah, okay. But I actually want to know, especially if it's a new builder, well, what are we going to receive? There's going to be a price and some bits and pieces, but are we going to get a full? Like, can you just talk us through? Because you then want to be able to present that to a client as well, and what we always ask is that it comes through us first, so we can kind of put some lines through it and then talk to a client, rather than sometimes it gets sent direct to a client. They're like, we don't understand this, and they're not supposed to either. So we try to guide that side of it as well. What happens when the tender comes in high? Can I negotiate with a builder?
And I guess, so you can definitely negotiate with a builder. But what you don't want to be doing is, if you've got a tender or you've got multiple tenders, you don't want to be negotiating with multiple people at the same time. You're not really allowed to do that. No. So you kind of have to then still work out, right, this is the builder that I really want to work with. The price is not where we need it to be. But we're going to work with this builder to try and get it to the price that we're comfortable with. And sometimes that'll happen even if it hasn't come in high. All of a sudden you're seeing all of these costs and you're just like, wow, I'm spending $10,000 on that. I don't see value in that. So that's coming out and those sorts of things. So,
and we do that on everything, right? Like, you might go, why are we spending X dollars on that? Some other people will be like, well, that sounds fine. Yeah. And I try to, as well, when you're sending the tenders out, and to say to the client, look, it's gone out, it's going to be back on, say, this date. Yep, I'll follow them up and so on. And I always try to say to them, look, just just be aware, like they're not all going to come back at the same price. And which I find a logical statement because there's so many things at play. I've had one client kind of go, but I don't understand, like they're all pricing the same thing. Shouldn't it be the same thing? And I'm like, I get what you're saying, but there's a human factor, there's costs, there's overheads and so on. But I also then back that up with going, well, just assume they're going to come over. We've then got to talk about it. The whole idea of that is to then be narrowing down, as you just said. So then you can go, look, we do like you, and the process is great and it all sounds good, except we do need to probably save 10, 15, 20%, whatever it's going to be. And then it's up to the builder to go, okay, look, I've got some ideas. Then you have the round table and you start to do some value engineering. And that's when we can then, if we've left enough in our, talked before about what percentage you get to tender, because you're leaving in a little bit of a buffer to not only do that, or if it comes back perfectly on price and they go, let's go with them, we go, okay, let's just tidy up some things, dot some I's, cross some T's, finalise all those bits, then it's away. So that's in its simplest form. What that question doesn't talk about is the emotive side, the disappointment, the deflation, and they're all normal. We're not saying you won't feel it. You do feel it. Like it's with everything, right? The important thing is that we know these things aren't an exact science. So you can't just pin it right down to that exact budget. You're hoping clearly to get within the ballpark that you can then kick it around with the right people to get to that result. So I think that, that journey document that we've been doing, that all of this stuff is about information and not trying to scare people and drop things on them, but to say this is the process, but we're here for you. We know we're going to work. This is about finding the right personnel, and if we're in that ballpark, we can bring it back. But at the same time, I also get the disappointment. I also get sometimes the emails we get, which is I'll be very disappointed. It deflates us too because we don't want to do that. That's not our aim. And yes, there can be a little bit of blame in there. We just suck it up a little bit, unfortunately. But it's sort of part of the game, right? Well, not the game, it's part of the process. So it's probably one of the most pointed top points because it's like it's right at that end of the siren when you've done all this work and you're going, okay, how do we get this here? So how do I know I'm getting a fair price?
So I think this is where, I guess in some ways, this is where if we kind of look at the two different ways that you can end up getting a price, you can either, we've been talking a lot about tendering and, getting a price from 2 or 3 or 4 different builders.
Yep.
Or you can get a builder engaged at an early stage and start getting that indicative price before they sort of refine it. If you've gone out to 2 or 3 or 4 builders, you start to see what the market price is. You might end up with two prices that are fairly similar and then one that's quite high or quite low.
Yeah. Yep.
And then you start questioning why that one's different to the other ones. So maybe that one has missed something, or maybe they haven't. Maybe they don't want to do it and they'll put in a high price or something like that.
Yep.
So you can kind of start to weed out, but potentially an unfair price in that instance. And then if you're getting a builder on board at a very early stage, you want to make sure that that everything they do is fairly open book and transparent. If they're saying, you're likely to be spending $15,000 on steel, and then you get a next iteration of a price and it's $25,000 on steel.
Yep.
You kind of have to question it and go, right, why is that?
It's because you missed a bit before, and that can happen.
Yep, that's
or
right.
Is it because in finishing that 20%, a detail changed and it's like, oh, hang on, that's going to be more time. Yeah, I think that's fair.
And I think regardless of which sort of path you go down of those two options, being able to ask, having a clear set of numbers of what all the different things cost, and then being able to ask questions about it and say, well, hang on, why is that one higher than what we thought? Or other builders have kind of allowed this. Why is yours higher than theirs? You do start to, I guess, interrogate it, and then the answers that you get back start to inform you whether or not it's actually a fair price.
And I think when we've gotten to that space, we should be talking about smaller percentages of differences in theory, right? If we jump right back to like a sketch design and our process now that we've been using for a few years, where it's becoming a little bit more formalized with respect to the journey of going through it, and information we give on drawings. Now, in the early stage, we will be applying square metre rates because it's the proven item, a proven component at that level. It's not until you get further down that the square metre rate drops off because you're into tin tacks, right? But at the early stages, we can say, look, based on precedence, this type of construction in this locale with that builder and this level of finish, it's going to be around X dollars a square metre. So you've got 400 square metres multiplied by that. That's what it's going to be. In that first stage, and a client reads that, if they don't comment on it, we prompt them. Did you see that table up? Oh yeah, we saw that. It's like, it's pretty important. Like what we're saying is this design, which is meeting your brief of your program and so forth, in our minds feels like it's in this realm. Now, if that's not palatable, can we talk about how we can compromise things? Because going forward won't magically make the number go down. So that's going right the way back. So that due diligence we do through design, and we may have had some input from a builder, and it's not uncommon at sketch design, you having a coffee with a builder going, hey, I've got this, I'm not getting you to put your hand on your heart about it, but what do you think about this? Is that sort of rate pretty good? And he'll go, yeah, no, it feels well, or a bit higher, whatever. So that due diligence we're already doing, might be doing it with a builder that you don't end up with, but we're vetting that idea. That goes through all those. So by the time we do get to that notion of fair price, I'd like to think it gels with some early stuff, right? And there's also where we're seasoned and experienced enough to get then, because back here we don't have the 100 line items of all the costings, because we don't know all of it. But those square metre rates, if you dig into those, you know, we typically know, for instance, roughly speaking, joinery to the level that we do, and a lot of other architects, is going to be 10 to 12% of the construction cost. So if you're spending $1 million, expect the joinery package to be circa 120 grand. If we then get those tenders back and we see 3 builders, joinery 120, joinery 80, joinery 70, joinery 180, you start going, okay, we need to, what's going on there? And we don't do that with every line item. It's very hard for, say, with concrete and bricks and lights. But joinery, glazing, some steel to a certain degree, depending on the complexity of the home. So there are definitely big items where we can go, hang on, that doesn't feel right. But on the flip side, you get all those tenders back, and that joinery that I just said is 120, 115, 123, and 118. You start going, okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
You know, and electrical, for instance, should be around about 11%. Again, you do the process. So there's all different books, the red book, all different books about what the expectations are, but we need to get it to today's, and that's the juggle at the moment, is when there's all these purported media reports about things going up and things going down and whatever, we've still got to go, well, hang on, that doesn't feel quite right. I've got my mate who's an electrician, I can just go, hey, is this feeling about right? So that due diligence we're doing on those things is really important. We get glaziers in to talk to us, and we start asking those questions. It makes us more informed, so we can get this stuff as best we can to get the fair price. Yeah. And, you know, we try to educate and take the client along that journey along the way, so that when we're reading these, they're not going, holy shit, 120 grand for joinery? But I can go down to IKEA. It's like, hang on, that's a different, it's a different beast, right? So, bit of a long-winded explanation of that, but I think if we come, that's a really, like you wrote this, getting a fair price, like the fair price starts there.
And I think that's probably one of the things that most of our clients, I wouldn't say are worried about, but it's sort of it's the thing that, you know, they don't understand. You know, like they don't know what a fair price is.
That just makes them human, right? Like if I were in their position, and I still do, when I'm building things, I'm like getting prices things, and I say, is that fair? So you get another price and the like. So that's normal. Yeah. It's reassuring the clients along the way that this is normal. Yeah,
and I think the other part of it as well is that we're working with builders that we've got a good enough rapport with. You know, they don't want to be wasting their time putting in a really high price. Yeah. Just like, if they don't want to do the job, they don't want to do the job. That's okay. And they're not putting in a high price to try and rip you off,
Yes.
because then they've just wasted all that time.
Yeah.
So they're putting in a price to win the job.
Yeah.
They want the job.
Yeah.
It's
Well, interesting. I had that discussion with that new fella today. It was really good for a young fella who's had his faculties together. It was awesome. So what I've always said is, and I won't use names of builders, but a majority of the best builders, they're pricing in-house. They've got their own estimators, or they're so attuned to their own processes that they're putting their stamp on their price. Yes, they're asking the specialties like your sparkies and your plumbers, which you need that feedback. But all in all, they know what their prices are, right? So when they're putting that, again, fair price, when they're putting their thing, they're like, this is the price I believe it's going to be, and I want to win it at this price. I don't want to make it more and be greedy, and I don't want to undercut it because I'll risk getting the job and then being out.
Yeah.
So that's a fair price. I have some concerns about third parties that builders might use to price a project, and it comes in and they get that and they go, oh, well, that's what that's done. So that's I find it really dangerous for the builders to be resting on their laurels to just go on what someone else says. And I think as well, with the advent of, there's some really cool software that the builders are using, and there's a raft of them, and some of the printouts they can produce and show that you can feed in 3 prices, and it's quite amazing. That, I'm not saying it's putting other people out of work, but it's also they're vested in the project. There's an incentive for them to win it. They don't want to go too high, and they don't want to get, strangely enough, that's the price. In theory, if they've gone out and got 3 prices for sparkies, and they pick the best one for whatever reason, whether it's cost and or inclusions, exclusions. Theory, at the end, the things that are different for all builders will be what? Overheads, their foreman costs, prelims, how many toilets, how much, all that, workhouse safety, all those things. Probably we don't, there's a lot of things we learn going, why has scaffold gone up so much? Oh, the new scaffold rules. It's like, okay, well, can't argue with that. It's about safety. So margins and the likes, and that's when that negotiation can be talked to, because it might get to the point and the client's like, look, we really just can't extend to that. And the builder might then go, look, I can
get you to this.
Yeah. So, and I think there's a little bit of, if you can sharpen your pencil on that, that'd be great. But appreciate, if you can't, then we might have to go elsewhere or whatever. And that's just open communication. So that's all in and around fair price and how we establish what that could look like.
Yep.
If you have multiple tenders, you'll generally be able to see what the market price is. There might be an outer price.
So I think an outlier price.
An outlier price.
Yeah, that's what I was saying before. So you might find you got 2 prices that are kind of similar, and then you might have a high one and a low one.
Yep. And there's general reasons around that, whether they may have not received enough feedback and they've gone, oh, I'm just going to, I'll put sounds horrible, a rubbery number to cover me because I'm just not sure. And I think that's fair. And more often than not, they'll disclose that and you can see it.
Yep.
4 tenderers might have glazing at $327,502 and someone's got 300 grand on the nut.
A nice round number.
Yeah. I pulled the builder up for that one day. I said, oh, they're all just really round, rubbery numbers. He goes, I just like them all to line up. I said, what it says to me is that they're all guessed. He goes, no. And he showed me and he just either rounded it up or down on it. So I'm like, it doesn't, I'd rather see lots of figures there. With just one builder, you'll want to have enough information in their price to feel that it's all transparent and open book. Example, this might be around numbers in the price versus prices down to dollars and cents. So
that's what you're saying then.
I think on that note as well, though, if you've just got the one builder, clearly there's got to be a lot of trust and so forth in there. But even we keep going back to yesteryear or 10 years ago to try and get a builder back then to actually show their scratchings. It was really hard, and I kind of got it. Maybe that comes back to they weren't getting paid, but the word open book, I think, is really important. And it's often used for things like, let's say in a contract, they've got $50,000 for a prime cost for excavation because they're just not sure what they might hit. So the open book notion of that is, well, I've got my best excavating contractor here, and here's his weekly tickets. So he's actually been here. This is his time, and this is his cost, and it's come in at 53 grand. That open book notion, if you take that away and the client goes, oh, I'm going to give you a variation for 3 grand because I went over, they're like, well, how do I know? And that's at the start of the project. So if you don't open book and show that, the trust, you might have issues along the way. And I use that as an example because for those out there, you know, we can do surveys and we can do geotech and we can have engineering. We don't know. Like, we've had some weird things. We've dug down in that Hendra job and it was on a splitter, and they were digging down and were digging up car tyres because the person who split it, the pool was over the 2 lots and they just filled it with car tyres and grew turf over it. Now, that's not the client's fault. It's not the builder's fault, and we sure as hell didn't know about it. But it's like, well, there's a variation there, unfortunately, because we've got to dig all that out and demolish the pool and rebuild the fence and so on. A glorified example there, but it can happen, and it always happens in the first month of the build because you're just getting out of the ground. So again, we communicate that to them. And even when I was building my house 17 years ago, Scotty MacGyver, great guy, great builder, love the house. He goes, oh, I've got 5 grand in there for excavation. I'm like, it's in the gap, up a hill, there's floaters. Let's call it 30. Just put it in their contractor's 30 and we'll watch your tickets. And it came in at about 25. So he wasn't doing the wrong thing, but it was like, oh, is it, you know, it's making the bottom line feel nice, but it's probably not a real prime cost. And so it can happen with landscape as well. Ask questions, and the detail you get back might begin to tell you how thorough and accurate the price is. For example, asking what is included in specific line items might highlight where assumptions and allowances. And I think that's like the PS, so prime sum and a provisional sum and prime cost. They're the ones that clients don't often know about. Well, what's that for? And more often than not, in the open book, there's a page that talks of all of the prime costs, and some of them might be excavation, or it might be tiles allowance, and that's fine. That's conforming because they've highlighted, they've allowed 30 grand for tiling, and in that allowance is based on a tile that's $69 a square metre. Because we may not have finalised the tile selection. They could put something in at $10 a square metre. You're not going to get it. So that's a good number, and you can manage that. So and I think that just that first bit, ask questions. I think there's so many links in this whole chain, and this contract and or their breakdown. It's there to ask all, and there's no dumb questions. Like, we've asked them all, you know, and it's like, you know, as you said, some builders will put concrete into different areas and because there's core filling and then there's a concrete wall, and you don't ask, you don't know.
And I think, again, like if you're asking questions and it's hard to get the answers back that you know, like, as you say, like there's a provisional sum or something, you're asking about, you know, what's included. If you're not quite getting the answers back that you want, and you haven't even signed a contract with this builder yet, is that gonna, like, if it's that hard to get the information and be confident about it, is that actually the right builder for you?
That's right. And I think that actual signing of the contract, that's another, I mean, there's a whole raft of questions about that, and some people seek legal advice, some people seek our advice, they want some clarity, and I think it's fair. Like, again, like a lot of these questions are about fair price and fair conditions, and fair process will make a building run fair. Like, and I think that's how it's going to be.
Yep.
What happens if things go wrong? That's shit. Have we got time for this? Valid question.
And I think, look, this is probably something that will come up more as part of that contract administration thing. And to me, it just comes back to understanding that, you know, the QBCC is there to protect consumers to some degree. And, you know, so there's any builders that you're going to be dealing with have been, you know, they've had to apply through the QBCC to get their license so that they can actually build a place. So there's enough information there on the builders to know that they are going to be, you know, that they're going to be somewhat reliable. And I think that's, you know, that's, unfortunately, there's a few projects that we've dealt with over the years that have needed to get the QBCC involved once work has started.
And you don't want it, clearly.
No.
And it's got a lot to do with everything, all and sundry that we've talked about. It's about just dotting the I's and crossing the T's so that you're de-risking moving forward. And that's as simple as that.
Yep.
Not really related to that, but there was a question that came back on another, on a tender that has just gone out last week. And I thought it was worth mentioning because the builder asked, so when you get a contract, as part of the contract value, there's an insurance amount there that the builder needs to take out a policy for the project, which protects them from various things. The question came up was, do I need to allow for the owner's home insurance in my quote? And it got me thinking because there's some grey areas in there. My only advice to anyone who's signing a contract, looking to sign a contract, and you're renovating more so, just check make sure with your insurers that just to let them know, to say, hey, look, we're about to renovate, so we're about to pull this house apart. More often than not, there's a mortgage on it and it's their asset. So they've got a say in it. So it's fine. They're not going to say you can't do it, but you just want to make sure you're insured because you'll have an insurance from the builder, which without having a contract in front of me covers things like theft on the site, damage on the site by vandalism, inclement weather, whatever. But there's probably some things that aren't covered in the builder's part of the contract or insurance contract and probably not covered in there. So all I'm saying, it's a bit like going overseas. I always ring the banks and say I'm going overseas so you don't store my card because I've bought something in some foreign country. But I don't know if people would do it. Like to ring the insurance company and go, hey, just letting you know. So anyway, that was just a little bit of a side note. I think it was probably more born out of a commercial type arrangement, but it was, again, learning all these. It's always nice to learn things about, instead of just fobbing it off and going, nah, she'll be right.
Yeah.
You say that, it generally won't be.
Yeah.
But as you said, after this chat, because we're at the end of all those questions, and cracking questions, by the way, I didn't do them for one, so it didn't take me the time, and I hadn't read them, so it was more informative and less led, if that makes sense. So thank you, Chris, and I think you were able to talk a little bit more this time than the first one.
You let me speak more. That's good.
I'll say again though, it's super important, and I do think people will get a lot out of this one. I think it's very informative. There's no right and wrong, and it's all about communication, asking the questions. It's easy to pick up the phone and talk about these things rather than sort of, harbour them all. So look, we'll wrap that up. That was episode 7. Next episode, we will be doing CA, contract administration. So for all the followers, hopefully there's more and more each time. You can follow us on all of the social channels. I can't remember all of them. Chris, you want to shut this vault up? I'm not finishing that because there's a fly in it. I noticed you did, and yours had a fly in it as well, so you got a lunch in that as well.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you, mate.
Thank you.